for having the stamina and the interest to stay for our final session. And I'm very pleased to bring to this table people you've heard during those 3 days of conference in various capacities to address a kind of a larger question, the challenge of being a tourist attraction. So I'm very pleased to have around this table, this long table, not round table, Hetty Berg, Tomas Cebulski, and Shaul Bassi. And of course, the format of this very final session is very loose. I'm going to ask them a kind of general question that has to do with the challenge of being a tourist attraction, of course in a Jewish heritage context or perspective. I'll ask each of them to give a response from their perspective. Also, of course, there are other people in this room who represent other towns and other cities that are definitely facing the challenge of tourism or being a tourist attraction. Here we have Amsterdam, Auschwitz/Krakow, and Venice, but I'm thinking of Berlin, of Barcelona, of Prague, and there would definitely like Paris. Say it again? London, and we'll definitely would like to hear from you. So we'll also use the opportunity of this final session that's a little more loose and flexible to address afterwards. You'll have the floor if you want to ask specific questions to our speakers, other things from the conference. This is also a time to kind of wrap up and some takeaways and some suggestions, and we'll end those very abundant and rich 3 days this way. So have a seat, and let's start. The question I really want to ask our three panelists is, being a tourist destination, is it a challenge, is it an opportunity? Often when you speak about tourism, and I speak now as an academic who works a lot on tourism studies, when you say tourism, it's a horrible topic, it's a dirty word. Why in the world would you worry about this when there are so many beautiful things to talk about? And so I think the 3 days we've lived together show us that there are all kinds of interesting things happening in the field of tourism, especially when you add Jewish heritage to that term. And so can we think about Jewish heritage tourism the challenge of being a tourist destination from this perspective? And I would like to specifically you to address this question, thinking of 4 aspects that are really specific to Jewish heritage in the context of mass tourism, or just tourism on a large scale. The first one is the challenge or the opportunity of placing Jewish heritage on the map when there is major competition. The Holocaust as a subtext, when there's a local active Jewish community keeping its routine, its festivals, its activities, its learning, etc. And the challenge of mass tourism per se. We've heard numbers this morning. There are more numbers we could. And maybe some strategies about this. We also have heard some strategies, whether it has to do with branding, with programming, with funding, with partnerships, all kinds of other ideas that can be helpful in dealing with both maybe the blessing and the curse of being a tourist attraction when you are a site of Jewish heritage. That was a long question, a long introduction. You can take it from whatever perspective you'd like, address some of the aspects or all of the aspects or none of these aspects, and you have the floor. Thank you. Ladies first? Yes, first. So much chivalry.
Yes, in some cases it's ladies first. Thank you, Brigitte. And first of all, I thought what I really enjoyed in this conference is that we were with some people from so many different fields. So the people like really on the ground, guiding themselves. Groups, academics, people from museums, people from NGOs, people from Jewish communities that manage Jewish heritage. So I thought it was really very stimulating. These are a lot of questions. Some I think I already touched upon in my presentation this morning, but there are a few things that I think that are important. Like putting Jewish heritage on the map, I think I have explained or tried to show how we try to do it. And I want to say again very much that this is really a marketing tool. So I got some questions in the break. The Jewish Cultural Quarter doesn't exist as a legal entity. The legal entity, we are like a partnership of different legal entities, which is not so easy, but that is because all these institutions already existed before. So these are different legal entities that we partner with, and that has its own dynamics and sometimes complications. I think that in our case, the growing tourism in Amsterdam, mass tourism, there's a lot of complaints about from people who live in Amsterdam that the tourism is getting too fast, is only an opportunity. I mean, we have a very beautiful number of visits now, but it's something that we could really increase, and we're not suffering from it yet. I mean, we really want to augment it. So I think for us at this moment, the mass tourism to Amsterdam, we can capitalize upon to try to, through our marketing tools and through our programming, because marketing without a program, of course, has no content, and I'm from the content side, so I think it's very important, but through the programming to get as many people as possible and as many different groups of people, because we cater for many different target groups, also for the Netherlands, people from the Netherlands that come for our temporary exhibitions. We also have this double bind with a Portuguese synagogue that is still used as a synagogue, which has a very different dynamic than the museum. It has different closing times. I mean, the museum is open on Shabbat. The Portuguese synagogue is not on the Jewish holidays. The synagogue, of course, is closed. It's not closed because there are services, but it's closed for the tourists. The Jewish Historical Museum is only closed on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and all the other Jewish festivals it's open. So it has a very different dynamic in that sense, and it's also sometimes difficult to deal with our different interests as two different organizations. Also, we have beautiful concerts by candlelight in the Portuguese synagogue, but of course there's no women voices allowed, you know, so all these things we have to deal with, and we sometimes have to ask the rabbi, you know, can we do this? Or he says, no, you cannot do this. When we had the Torah scrolls in the treasure rooms, then suddenly he decided that it was not okay that we had them there, I mean, closed on show, so they had to go into the closed depot. So all these kind of things, which makes it very interesting, I think. The strategies of the branding, I think, is very important to put it on the map, to put all your with whomever you have a partnership, to put it on the map, not just on a map, but also to the on the website, on all the different things that you can do it. And we are, I think, in a very luxurious position because we get government funding, not for projects, but for our basic running costs. We get it for the memorial, separate entity, separate foundation. For the Jewish Historical Museum as a separate foundation, they're all private foundations. And the Portuguese, we get it also for the cultural heritage of the Portuguese synagogue. So it's not like it's all integrated like on a legal level, but it works, and I think it is. For us, it's a very good model, and maybe for some of you, it could be an inspiration for a future model.
Mass tourism is a reality, and it is. It's just happening. The more we are fighting against it, the more it's a battle lost. So we actually need to find patterns and ways to make it an opportunity. and to make it an educational opportunity, and to address our visitors that are coming into those sites with some kind of attractive content which at first unfortunately needs to be catchy, needs to sell using the economical language, because first you need to attract the attention. How to attract a couple of thousands of conscious people coming from the 20 millions of visitors of Venice into the ghetto. So what kind of a catchy element you can generate so that to direct them here. So that's the first thing. Another thing is, what do you offer to this visitor who is already entering into the ghetto? How do you keep the interest going? Where do you direct the attention? How do you tell the story? Whether you meet the local community or not, it also depends on the nature of this community, whether it's a young, hip and trendy JCC in Krakow, which has the energy and will to meet and be exposed and talk and organize Shabbat meals, or whether it's an older community and people really don't need and don't want to meet foreigners every day. It's becoming overwhelming. It's becoming overwhelming for me, and I'm not an old guy. But it's becoming overwhelming for me to participate in a meeting number 1200 something and explain the things from a square one. I'm a very patient person, but my patience also has limits. So the meeting with a community depends on the nature of this community. And I think every site needs to find its own answer into how to do things. And every site is unique in a way. All of those wonderful presentations that you brought, they took us on a journey. I was taken on a trip, actually, so thank you very much for being guides on those little trips. And you've made me interested, and you've made me to come into all those places and explore them. I know most of those places, but I don't know them in the dimension that you were presenting. So it's actually very enlightening to see those places from a perspective of an expert that is talking about it. What was this trip about that we were within the last 2 days? The trip like this, from a point of view of an expert, of either you and me, has 2 dimensions. One of the dimensions, and it's a dimension for you and me as an expert in our sites, is a very vertical dimension. We go down vertically in history. We are exploring something, we are learning the details, we are building contacts, we are bringing objects. And this vertical dimension of going deep in history is pretty much our experience. And then we bring this content that we retrieved from history, which we retrieved from meeting with people, we retrieved from objects into the contemporary world of commercial, of mass tourism. And at this point, it's upon us how to make it vertical. So how to actually spread the news. Horizontal, we're traveling horizontal. And now the question is how to bring it horizontal. So how to spread the news. Which objects to choose, which people to show, which stories to tell. And you need to diversify. Because the mass tourism is a very collective term, but within the mass tourism, you got all kinds of people coming. What do you do with 50,000 of South Koreans coming to Auschwitz every year? 50,000 of South Koreans. What do you do with those people? You ignore them. For a long time, they were actually ignored. I decided to research it a little bit deeper and to try to understand why those people are coming. What's the motivation? I started to talk with the group leaders. I started to talk with one Auschwitz guide who actually guides in Korean. And you are learning fascinating things. It's a long story, but on a very basic concept, those people are coming because there is a very large unprocessed trauma of Japanese occupation of China and Korea. So there's a huge level of trauma which was never debated and never faced in the country. And another thing, there's North Korea and labor camps up there, which are only imagined spaces. And actually for nowadays South Korean, it's very interesting and parallel to visit Auschwitz in order to learn something historically and learn something about a contemporary North Korea. And we need to address those visitors. We need to somehow try to create a content and to create a meeting space so that they take something away from visiting contemporary Auschwitz, and at the same time they are learning about the history of Auschwitz itself. And it's a fascinating task. It's absolutely fascinating. So the mass tourism per se is very diverse and complicated. And the better we know our audience, the better we will be in doing our job, in moving horizontally, dispersing our vertical knowledge of a site. The thing I've heard also within this conference, we are getting all very possessive about our sites, which is a very natural thing. Because if you spend your life in development of a site, you are getting very possessive about it. But you need to reach to the point in which you are starting to give away this child into the broader audience, and you need to unfortunately start to think about commercialization of the site, which is bringing a whole number of problems and issues, and you need to find a good balance. And every site will have a different balance in between the authenticity of a site and this vertical travel and the horizontal commercialization. And you need to answer those questions yourself. And those are answers in case of, for example, Venice, which needs to be debated within the Jewish community. And that's another point which I need to make. In the development and promotion of those sites, I think there's an absolutely needed aspect of involving the local community, even if it's not a Jewish community, involving the local people that live on the site. Because the more you are promoting the site and the more mass tourism it's becoming, you have to realize that it's becoming a burden for the local population. And you will be at a certain point responsible for creating this burden on the local population. Mass tourism has a lot of dark sides and down parts. And sooner or later you will collide with all kinds of little problems with the local population. And unfortunately, in the political reality in which we live, in which confrontational language is becoming more and more common, I can assure you that there will come a local politician who will try to capitalize on that. So the better local connections and the more involvement of the local community who can actually stand behind you at a certain point, which Tomas was beautifully showing, the longer lasting effect of the institution or the site you will have. So thank you very much. Those are just very loose comments.
Well, first of all, I want to add my thanks and my gratitude for the very rich conference. I wish I had been here more. I'll start by sharing some simple facts that I think are essential to frame my brief remarks. When I was born in 1970, there were 110,000 residents in Venice, 110,000, and now there are 54,000. There are over 1,000 members of the local Jewish community. Now we are below 500. So those are the hard facts that one needs to cope with before saying anything more specific. And so over my lifetime, I grew from thinking of tourism to the ghetto, first as a curiosity, then as a challenge, then as a disgrace, and now I see it by and large as an opportunity, as long as Tomas has just said, you don't consider tourism as an undifferentiated phenomenon, but you really see what are the different ways and aspects of experiencing the ghetto. I could say that I spent most of my time, my early years, trying to be in the ghetto as little as possible. I would come here for the holidays, but other than that, I had no desire to be around here. It was not a place that gave me any pleasant feeling. When I bought a house, the realtor asked me, where would you like to live in Venice? And I told him, really, anywhere but the ghetto. Find me something, I was there enough, my ancestors was there enough, even though my ancestors actually chose to be here. And then, like a dozen years ago, I had the good fortune of meeting my friend and colleague Murray Baumgarten, who was here in the last, he was here yesterday and the day before yesterday. He was an academic like me who suggested we organize a summer school in the ghetto. And we spent 5 weeks in the ghetto. And I think it was the first time in my life that I would be here on a daily basis for that long. with 20 people who were simply curious to know and learn about this place. And that was a transformative experience. And my role was to try to engage the community. I'm, as a member of the Jewish community, try to see that these people would not be isolated, they would be integrated. Those of them who wanted to participate in religious life would be welcomed. And so it was really a very rewarding experience, which led in turn to the creation of what is today Bet Venezia, a home for Jewish culture. Now, I could talk for a long time, and I've written about what is happening now. To be very concise, what I think is that if tourism here, in the broader context of Venice, is about getting more and more people to consume the place in shorter and shorter times, we are dead. This is going to kill the community, it's going to kill the larger Venetian community. There is a wonderful book that I'd like to recommend. It's called If Venice Dies by Salvatore Settis, who's a very prominent cultural historian. And he makes the claim that Venice needs to be saved because I love that definition, it's a thinking machine. It's the place when you walk around surrounded by beauty, you meet people, you interact, you have that kind of social exchange. But he says very clearly, saving Venice is not just about keeping the monuments in good shape. It's also about preserving the community of people that know what these monuments are, the stories that make them alive. And it's not about preserving a species of people, because the Jewish community is the perfect example of how Venice has always integrated new populations over time. So that cosmopolitan tradition. So one of the paradoxes, I think, of the ghetto today is that the people who, especially the older members of the community, who feel that this new international dimension of the ghetto is really, and a lot of things resonated with what Laura Forti was saying yesterday about Florence. You see this mass influx of people, and you say, oh, how I miss the good old days when we were all one big family. We had our family quarrels, but we're all in Italian, and we didn't have to deal with all these newcomers. But in fact, that experience has taught me that, in fact, the ghetto was cosmopolitan and international and multilingual from the very beginning. So in fact, embracing a certain type of tourism is in fact not an escape from tradition, but it's a returning to a certain type of tradition. So in conclusion, everything we do at Bet Venezia is about trying to make people stay and come to, our slogan is live, learn, and create. I have nothing against the normal type of tourism that I normally do. If I go to Amsterdam, I go to all the Jewish quarters. Many Italian Jews normally go to synagogue only when they are abroad. It's an old tradition of becoming more devout only when you are traveling. Yeah. But apart from that, and I really want to say, I hope you'll have a chance to talk to other members of the community, because my view is kind of idiosyncratic. But I believe that if there is a future for the Jewish community of Venice, it's an international future. It's about having an interplay and interaction between the locals and the visitors. But those visitors cannot be people who come here only for a few hours. I think they need to come here with a project, with an educational project, with a creative project. Giuseppe Balzano, our director, briefly mentioned the Haggadah. So there are, let's say, basic functions performed by the Jewish Museum, the visit, the celebration. But other than that, what I keep telling almost obsessively to our leadership is, either you create a platform or ways in which people can come here, stay, maybe not for as long as 5 weeks, but maybe 1 week, 2 weeks, or and go away with a project. That, to me, is what can sort of make this a nice place. Otherwise, I think I've been, like many of you, to enough places where there are beautifully restored monuments and there's no Jewish life as such. That, for me, would be really the most painful thing.
Is anybody in the room? First, I'd like to know if one of the speakers who has something to say, to respond, to add to what was said, not to call on specific people, you know who you are, but I want to give this opportunity to the speakers first. We have only one microphone left.
No, there's a
So, shall I let you
Thanks to the speakers, and I would like to come back to several ideas made. But first of all, I would like to say that I think the major question is how does the Jewish heritage tourism fits into the development or general development of the tourism industry. Tourism industry is changing, it's not stable, it's growing and changing. And the question is, how can we, as professionals interested in Jewish heritage in general, and Jewish heritage tourism in particular, fit into the changing trends? And I will not make my talk too much, I will leave some time to others, but I will connect to what Tomas said, vertical and horizontal. And I believe that Jewish heritage tourism can contribute to the spread, to the dispersion of mass tourism. Mass tourism, as you described it, is becoming terrible in several places. It's disturbing, it hurts, people are coming back, but I would like to see some other smaller places. And Jewish heritage tourism fits perfectly into this desire to see the countryside, to see smaller places, to see some ancient stories and so on and so forth. So this is the horizontal aspect which fits into the tourism industry of today. Before closing, I would like to thank the organizers, Brigitte, Sion, Barbara, Cato, Ruth, who was behind the scene and contributed so much, and all others, Venetian House of Venezia, and so on, for gathering this nice conference. I think we have to think about the future of such conferences, because it was really great. And the question is, would we convene every year, once in 2 years? I don't know what are the resources required, but I think we have to make it a permanent place for Jewish heritage tourism meetings.
I'd like to just add something. It's housekeeping that follows on what Shaul said. Over the break, people asked if we could provide a list of emails for everybody. We have the emails and the biographies of the speakers who were invited, the presenters. But for all of you who just signed up to come, I think we have to ask you maybe if we can share your emails. So if we have everybody's emails, but we probably will send out a message or something like that, because not everybody's here, about how so we'll be making some mechanism whereby we can create a group or a list or something like that. But meanwhile, I'll be also asking people who have written presentations that we can post on Jewish Heritage Europe, and the videos will be posted at some point too. So there will be a mechanism for getting in touch. So Leontine.
Maybe in 2 years' time we can meet in the Ark and we can discuss whether or not this Ark is Jewish or not. Thank you, dear speakers. I have a question which sort of relates back to this concept of slow tourism I mentioned before, and also our ethical responsibility. And I can imagine with the shtetl tours and also the wonderful case study in the former Sudetenland, it's about economic regeneration, which is good. But in my case, and I can imagine also in your Phoenician and I know Amsterdam case, it's about being a player that tries to work or have a stand against these mass changes of urban fabric in the near vicinity of your museum or your quarter. So when I'm saying I want to do more local and I want to sort of help this neighborhood, I'm also indirectly am responsible for the fact that probably the rents will become higher. So a lot of people that I want to get into my museum will maybe in 10 years' time don't have the money and resources anymore to live in that neighborhood. Is that happening in the ghetto as well? So this whole concept of gentrification, where slow cities and slow architecture, and therefore all slow tourism, tries to work. Because I have an ethical dilemma there, and now I'm engaging, and also other colleagues of mine are engaging in the local city government and in NGOs in the local context, in the local fabric, to sort of work on the social and economic regeneration of the neighborhood, but that it doesn't become this gentrified area, because, you know, we all learned from the Tate South Bank case study. Is that something that you are reflecting upon and also taking a stand, or I'm just curious because I don't know what to do, actually. You. It was you, Bent.
I want to share, there are two things that are very interesting for me. It's the interplay between the Jewish community and the institutions, like you mentioned, and it's the interplay between the NGOs and the institutions, which are heavily state-funded and the big, heavy institutions, while the NGOs are floating up there in the air. First of all, about the Jewish community, because there is a problem here, because the Jewish community in Europe, we're all so fragile. We're trying to, you know, find out who we are and to exist, even to know about our Judaism and so on and so forth. Or just leaving to Israel, or just forgetting about being Jewish. So we have a big problem, you know, being Jewish in Europe. So many of them don't want to be guinea pigs and, you know, hey, I'm Jewish, it's so nice, I'm celebrating Shabbos. You know, it's not like that. Usually they don't even want to be on the gallery for exhibitions. They want to be completely, in Poland I have a problem, they want to be invisible. They want to create their kind of Judaism and in hiding. While what I'm doing is, you know, being part of the whole scene, like a public place. So I cannot operate like that. So that is a big problem, how to relate together with the Jewish community and also get them interested, like you were saying, that, you know, being Jewish, maybe in the future, maybe this kind of, you know, Jewish heritage is really interesting for you and your kids, and in order to, you know, identify yourselves. It's not only Shabbos, but it's also the ghetto in Venice and the Amsterdam quarter and Breslau and Wrocław. So this is very difficult to get through because we have also educated our children in that way that it's, you know, it's just religion and Israel. This is just a comment. So we don't really, you know, it's a very problematic, and in Poland, for example, most of those who are really very, very engaged, they are not Jews even, you know. So that is one really big problem, because we are, whether or not, all of Europe is becoming a big tourist attraction, all of Europe, for the whole world. And the Jews are one of the biggest tourist attractions, because we don't exist anymore. But we were killed in Auschwitz, and you have all those millions of synagogues all around. So those synagogues are going to be more and more important, that we see from this conference. So that was the one thing, and that's why I want to come to the NGO and the institutions. Because the institutions, they're, you know, like one said, oh, 10 years ago, or it took us 70, 80 years after the Holocaust to create all of these synagogues back and to understand that they have any value. Even we have some Israelis who realize it's also important for the future. So, you know, but at the same time, you have a lot of people just popping up and making some NGOs, because democracy is all about NGOs, isn't it? They're trying to kill us, but it is about NGOs also. And how can we do for the future that we can kind of all kind of benefit from the interplay between these huge institutions that are heavy and are busy with all their millions of tourists, and with these NGOs, with a lot of fantastic people who do a lot of work, most of the time completely pro bono, but they exist all over Europe. So this is these two questions. I'm sorry, sorry.
Just to answer on this last point. I'd like to. I think NGOs and the various locals are part of what I mentioned as strategies in my little introduction before letting the floor to our speakers, and it's really about partnerships. So the NGO, what you use as NGO, maybe as a umbrella name, whether it's foundations, whether it's artistic organizations, whether it's various agencies. There are, these are all the kind of partnerships that help grow, develop, manage heritage tourism sites, Jewish or not, and that's definitely something to take into account. Also for funding, also for bringing more energy together. Does any of you want to respond? There were a lot of comments, but anyone before we? They still have the mic, so they have the power now. But you have a microphone. Okay, let's continue with a couple more questions. Jonathan, you have. Oh, you have something. I'm sorry.
Well. Gentrification is, of course, an unavoidable factor, but as I was trying to say, you have to put it in Venice in the larger context. So I think that needs to elicit political solution at the sort of higher level, and we recently learned that Amsterdam, I think, is doing something for that, so maybe, and hopefully Venice should do something there. I don't think that the Jewish community is, giving these numbers can do anything about that, but the larger point I'd like to make to this effect is that I'm really trying hard to go beyond the binary local versus tourist, because I don't think that is very, very helpful, because that's how most Venetians think in terms of, who lives here and who is not from here. But to me, it makes a huge difference whether I meet someone in the ghetto who has arrived 2 hours earlier on a big cruise ship. Was last Yom Kippur, there was someone who came to Shaul and says, "Oh, would you like to attend service?" And said, "No, I already did Kal Nidre on the cruise ship." That's the kind of thing we have here. Yeah? And someone who is here and is here maybe for 6 months because Tel Aviv has a program here, or is here because has come to do an artistic project. So I think, at least as far as we are concerned, I believe that really we need to think of a sort of this slow tourist, or people here, they are neither full-time residents nor tourists. There are so many people who spend maybe 1-2 months in Venice every year. So that segment of the population, to me, is crucial. Venice has 50 museums, 50. I think we have the highest ratio of museums per inhabitant, and each of them can, generate work and experience and this like that. So that's the.
Bohemians, I heard they are called.
Really? Oh, okay. Okay, well, EasyJet Bohemian is a great definition, and EasyJet is trying to buy Alitalia, so we could extend that. That's great. So anyway, that was the thing I want to say. In terms of the, well, I think that I was also trying to respond to this idea of the NGO versus the Jewish community. I mean, here, for instance, it's important to say that the ghetto is not fully defined by the Holocaust, as other places, especially in Eastern Europe, are. At least we try not to make that, even though what you see, the public display in the ghetto suggests that. That's a problem. So I've written a lot about the ghetto as a screen on which different Jewish visitors project their own narratives. For someone, the presence of Chabad make it look like a shtetl, the presence of the Holocaust memorials make it look like a Nazi camp. So it's interesting how the ghetto can change its identity according to who the visitor is. But
as brief as I can be, and I will try to be brief. When it comes to gentrification of a district, the example of Kazimierz in Krakow, I think your idea of a slow movement is brilliant. And if you do a slow gentrification, it's absolutely uplifting for the entire community that lives there. So you have to understand as an opportunity. You don't have to be afraid of that. If you do it step by step, if you speed the process up, you will finish with a Jurassic Park. I'm answering the question of Laurentine. So I'm answering the question of Laurentine about the fear of gentrification of a district and what will be the result. So if you do it slowly and gradually, the result will be generally uplifting for the community that lives there. In Krakow, Kazimierz, it happened too fast. And we know today that it happened too fast. And we have certain sections of the district which went into the Jurassic Park more than any kind of a value that is there. To answer the question about the community life and meetings, I think in the tourist industry today, we are becoming a little bit too much of a control freaks as guides and as tourist agencies. And we want to prepare a ready product and we want the visitors to consume it. And it's a wrong path. Because for me, traveling has always been an exploration. A travel itself demands an active role of a traveler. You need to look for places, you need to look for people. In case of Venice here, I much more treasure a visit to a local Jewish bakery and talking to a baker or to a shop and talking to a local guy than spending probably an hour in a museum. So you need to make a visitor proactive. You need to create opportunities for this visitor to meet local population, but not in some superficial meeting in a room in which you want to start a conversation. No, just create a community life, and if this traveler wants to meet those people out there, he needs to take an effort to meet those people. And that's probably a good way of doing things, I hope.
Yeah, what struck me most, and what I already referred to a little bit, is that we operate in such different contexts, all of us, and that those contexts are really defining what we can do, what we want to do, what we're supposed to do. And so also Bente's remark about the NGOs and versus the big institutions. Well, I'm from a big institution, but the institution is an NGO. So, I mean, it's not like a governmental organization, although it gets some of its subsidy from there. So it's very hard to speak in these kind of terms because we all come from somewhere else, and in each place this remark has a significance, but a different significance. So it's very hard to speak about that in general terms. And also, if we say we, you know, who are we as the sender of our message or product or whatever? I mean, that is also, you know, we're all in a different political framework, all different implications of some were more conscious than of others. I mean, some of this also came up in the discussions. So I think that is a very important part that we all have to be conscious of, and that is also in a way to become conscious of it is one thing, but it's also maybe limitation of conferences to really get further into things, because for every one of us we deal with a different situation. It's very hard to generalize.
We have another round of questions. Jonathan, you have the microphone. We ask you to be brief, all of you, and we're going to gather a number of questions and then give the floor back to our speakers.
Very, very briefly, my name is Jonathan Webber. I'm British. I live in Poland. I've lived in Poland for 7 years. I'm a university professor, but I've been an activist in lots of projects of heritage, Jewish heritage. I'd really like to make follow up on Shaul's point about summer schools in Venice and the idea of slow visiting. 2 points. First of all, in Poland, it's possible to be a volunteer to clean up a Jewish cemetery. This issue has not been specifically mentioned in the last 3 days, but it's increasingly important. People who want to visit Poland may go on one of Helise Lieberman's Tauber tours, but they may also come for 2 weeks and 3 weeks, even 4 weeks, to stay in a small village where there used to be a Jewish community and volunteer to clean up a cemetery. It is becoming extremely common. And what is an interesting aspect of this, that a lot of these people do home stays. They stay in local people's homes for a small fee, cheaper than a hotel, giving the young people an opportunity to interact with the local Polish teenagers and so on, and it's very effective. Secondly, in relation to that, the Auschwitz Museum, on which I was a member of the board for more than 20 years, decided at my instigation, I pushed and pushed and pushed, and they introduced the idea of coming to Auschwitz Museum and staying for a week, or staying for 2 weeks, and having in-depth seminars, and this has grown and grown and grown in recent years, that you can visit Auschwitz actually for a longer period rather than the standard 3-hour visit or 6-hour visit. So on the subject of slow visiting, I would mention those 2 points. Now, the key thing is this, it seems to me. Burden on the local community, burden on the local Jewish community, burden, this is Tomas's point, burden on the local Jewish community, burden on the local non-Jewish community. Putting it very crudely in words of plain English, 3 words which I wrote about, published about, speak about, I haven't mentioned yet here and hasn't been mentioned here. There's one thing we need to do. It's called what I call Jewish cultural diplomacy. Jewish cultural diplomacy. We need to learn as a people, as a nation, how to communicate with the others that we communicate with, the local Jewish community and the local non-Jewish community. We need to develop those skills. These are skills, and we need to develop them. Secondly, and finally, I think there's only one way to proceed in the future. The whole world that we have been talking about the last 3 days has changed unrecognizably in the last generation, half a generation, 25 years, even 10 years. When we heard Thomas Kraus's discussion this morning of this amazing project, and when we heard Hetty this morning talking about a new project which is only 5 years old, I mean, everybody has been saying this festival was founded a few years ago, that initiative was founded a few years ago. Give it another 10 years, it will be unrecognizable again. The question was raised earlier, when do we meet again? Just a moment, when do we meet again? I would like to suggest not founding a new NGO, but as an academic, I believe we need an institute of Jewish heritage studies. We need to train young people to get qualifications in Jewish heritage studies. Do you know that there is nowhere in Europe that offers an MA in Jewish heritage studies? That is ridiculous. How can we have something which is increasing so exponentially in the last generation, as we have seen, without even one institute anywhere in Europe? I know there's something starting in Paris, medieval manuscripts, but I think that we don't have an institute. I would like to suggest, and I'm going to stop, I've spoken to Dario Tisegni yesterday, we should found such an institute in Ferrara, which is going to have one of the best Jewish museums in Europe, opening very soon. It's a small town, small scale, not Venice, because there's 50 museums here already. We need to have an institute which will teach MA programs to the next generation of students, where it will be possible to develop expertise which can be disseminated, where we can learn best practices, circulate best practices, and learn about new developments.
Jeremy, you left and you came back.
Yes. So it's realizing the nature of time. It's an observation, but I would obviously be happy for the question. At the middle of the discussion about heritage tourism, without fear of sounding like a broken record in terms of being in the field of education, my interest is whether in the field of in the experience of mass tourism, there is a tendency to lose content and to be lost in the crowd, and therefore my interest is in all the projects that we've heard, the reflection inwards as to when we, beyond history and the past, what actually is the Jewish element in the middle of it. And therefore my question to you would be whether that's historical, cultural, sociological. What question are we asking tourists about who we actually are?
Tomas, and then I'll go there.
I had 2 points, maybe I go only to the other one. South Koreans, actually. They come to Prague because there is a TV series called Love from Praha. It's about a princess who fell in love in Prague with a policeman who is chasing criminals. So they are trying to find out where the other places, and they are disappointed that it's only few are real. But anyway, and they come to Terezin also, we don't know why. So very similar situation. So mass tourism actually it has also the component of cinema. We have to be aware of it. Well, I remember when Barbara Streisand was shooting Yentl in Prague, and it was a set for Lublin. You know, we were so offended because Prague Castle, you know. Anyway, so no, my point is more serious. Actually, my important point. We didn't tackle. Maybe some have mentioned it only as a fringe thing, but this is the point of security. It's absolutely contradiction with the mass tourism. Look at what happened in Brussels. Look at what happened in Hypercacher. And my responsibility in my community was, until a certain time, then I had to give up, also security. And this is exactly going against each other. So how we solve this dilemma?
We need to take one last comment and then give the floor.
I make it as brief as possible. The whole population of Israel is something like 8.5 million people. Now, according to the statistics, which I read in the paper, I haven't checked it, more than 4 million Israelis, half the population of Israel, has left to overseas destination, either for vacation or business, half population. Now, as an admin, the first thing I do when I take a newspaper in my hands is not the headlines, but the ads. I'm following the ads, and I frankly cannot remember in the last couple of years seeing an ad pinpointing a special Jewish event or like the Festival of Krakow or that kind of thing, when Israelis are, as you know, very much in love in going overseas destinations. So practically what I suggest is to consider a promotional effort. And mind you, I have excellent relations with Israeli travel agencies. That's my job. And I'm willing, pro bono, help with any kind of promotions that should be portrayed before Israelis. No problem. I will do it. Lovely. Thank you.
Do you want more Israelis? I had to ask the question. There was a lot there, especially the issue of training, I think, and security, which are really interesting. But anything else?
Okay. Well, training is a very important point. In itself, a very good idea. Also, something we talk about a lot. But also there, it's quite complicated that it doesn't, and the Association of European Jewish Museums also does a lot in that respect, but it's for museums and Judaica, etc., also broader educational programs. So there a lot of training is being done, but that is limited to museums. What I like the discussion about mass tourism, slow tourism, but I think that even within those categories, there are all the different tastes and all the different target groups, and I think that's it's very important. What we want is that as many people, as a broad group as possible, gets into contact with the story that we have to tell in our museum. So I would not want the person that only comes for a short visit. I'm also happy with that person. The person that stays long and starts to interact, great, and maybe I should be happy that they don't visit all the 5 venues, because then it means that they're more slow tourists. So I think that we should still cater for the whole range. I've been talking a lot about the international tourist, but we have of course also the local tourist and the national tourist, and even within those groups, it's such a diversity. But I think these are very important points, and also the sustainability that Leontine has mentioned before. Security, of course, is a very important issue, but I also I think that if we look at our visitor numbers, like in the whole range, the only real, if you can really speak like mass tourism, is maybe Berlin and Prague and the Anne Frank house. But I mean, I would not, with our amount of visits, I'm not talking about mass tourism yet, so I still would like to get to profiter, I don't know the word in profit from, take advantage of the mass tourism in Amsterdam.
It's very convenient to be the middleman, but also the middleman in between the academia and the industry, and seeing certain problems. I think the problem we're going to all face very soon, there will be no people to work in those institutions. There will be no people who can actually interpret history. There will be no people to operate those museums. There will be no guides who have the proper training and who can actually do the job in the field, not in the offices, in the field. Those who will be walking the guided tours, and they will be doing the proper job. So yes, the idea of creation of an institute to teach that people, even to the BA level, and offer them a future profession is a brilliant idea. And it's a necessity at this time. And we are all representing all kinds of various and specific places, but there is a common thread connecting us all that can be educated to the BA level and then taken to an MA level with a specificality of a place. Also, we can think about establishing a volunteer service which will be connecting all of those museums. So actually sending volunteers so that they are seeing the whole spectrum. There are things like, there are projects like this, I know. Another problem of security. Yes, it's a huge problem. It's an enormous problem, especially if we understand the context of the Middle East right now and the dynamic of denial. I'm always afraid of mentioning that publicly, but I don't even want to imagine what will happen if there is anything happening in Auschwitz. It's a site which is vulnerable on so many levels. And it's a site which is visited by over 100,000 of Israelis every year. So I don't even want to think what is going to happen if something happens there. And we have to consider that. Only about 3 years ago in the Auschwitz State Museums we've introduced security. It's a mock security, but it's a security. So you get a sense of going for security when you enter. So this is something that we've done, which is a huge, enormous logistical project because you have to provide security to 2 million visitors a year. And that's a huge obstacle, which also Laurentine was mentioning, because it's alienating people. And you are starting with a certain narrative entering an institution which is actually kind of alienating you, putting you aside. So that's a problem. And we have to debate those problems, because those will be the problems of the future as well. So thank you for bringing that.
As Laura Forti was mentioning yesterday, security has been an urgent issue in Italy since 1982 and the attack at the Rome synagogue. So nothing we've ever done here since then has been done without having an acute sense of the need of security. And I want to say, as a strange collateral effect, that is precisely by volunteering for the security that I became aware of the amazing range of Jewish visitors that were coming in the ghetto. You know, I was basically forced to ask everybody, where are you from? Do you belong to a Jewish community? I've read so many passports before I realized, oh wow, this is a great opportunity for the ghetto to have. I'm an academic, but I want to clarify that when I gave that example of the summer school, that I don't think of summer schools or educational experiences as exclusively academic. I think actually what we've done here in the last few years has really trying to create slow tourism, experiential tourism, educational opportunities for as many different people as possible. Jonathan Weber is actually the perfect example of someone who became part of the community, contributed to the community. It was really someone who actually made us also aware of certain parts of our tradition that not everybody knew, which is another thing. So the mechanism I want to emphasize is how, for instance, inviting 8 artists to create a new Haggadah allows us as community members to become more aware of the tradition of book printing in Venice, of what the minhag, the tradition, the ritual. So through that, we learn something. And then we had 8 artists that learned something about Jewish Venice. And finally, there is also a beautiful set of etchings and eventually a book that will circulate. So I see that as a good model where a specific project that keeps people here benefits both the visitors and the locals. And by the way,
Your
if Ferrara by any chance is not available, consider Venice for the master. We're merchants.
This is not quite concluding, but to address Jonathan, there is a program of cultural heritage management at CE University in Budapest, and in which Jewish heritage is also addressed, and they have or are trying to establish also some hands-on program of restoring Jewish cemetery in a village where they also work on, do restoration on other buildings. And it just granted its first MA to a woman who did her MA on Jewish cultural heritage management in Alba Iulia. So she'll be working with Tudor when she goes back, right? Michaela. So she got her MA on a project of how to work in the cultural heritage management and preservation and promotion field in a town where there's already the city interested. But they're trying to develop this program. They have a professor from the Jewish Studies program who also works with the cultural heritage. He teaches both in Jewish heritage and in cultural studies. So there is the basis for something. Of course, the future of CEU is under debate right now, but there is something, and there are many training programs. Last week there was a training program for museum curators here in Venice, sponsored by the Association of European Jewish Museums. So there are, Rothschild Foundation has sponsored a number of programs. So there are a number of programs and training programs. There needs to be more, of course, and I know that Emil talked about training tour guides for the Shtetl program. So it's not something that isn't being thought of. I don't really have any other concluding words, except I wish that this could go on longer. And a number of you have expressed the hope that there could be another. Can we do this every year? I know, it took a year to organize this, or even more. But as I said before, we want to create a mechanism whereby everybody can be in touch, learn from each other. Meanwhile, again, I implore you to send stuff for Jewish Heritage Europe, to subscribe to the website, the Facebook page, where a lot of things are posted that are relevant for what you're doing. And we'll be asking if we can share emails, because I don't think it's proper to share emails of people who just registered and didn't know that their emails were going to be shared. But we'll create some sort of mechanism where everybody can be in touch, and as much as possible. If there's someone here who has a paper that's written, get it to me so I can put it up online as soon as possible and everybody can read it. Yeah. Oh, the t-shirt. The Jewish Heritage Europe t-shirt, which is hot off the press. You have to make it, I can send you the logo and you have to get it printed. But they're not for sale. They're not for sale. But anybody who wants one, I mean, I got this printed in a t-shirt shop this is our new logo, which will be over. No, but I can send you the logo and you can get it produced locally. So, and it'd be great publicity. So.
The business of Jewish heritage. There it starts. We didn't have one T-shirt for each of you, but we should have maybe.
Just a few words. First of all, to congratulate Brigitte and all the organizers, because it was a very inspiring conference. So thank you really so much. And I want... and of course, with Brigitte, all the Venetian friends who took care, Shaul, Barbara, and all the others who arranged this wonderful seminar. I would like also to thank for his proposal Jonathan, and I would like to add something. We had a short talk yesterday about this issue, and I think that's a very interesting proposal for the fact that, well, first of all, as you know, we have here in Italy a wonderful and very well-spread heritage all over the country. And around the maze, the new museum, we want to do something very important, because we don't want just to build up a museum, but more than a museum, it will be a cultural center, a research center, and so on. Concerning the heritage, I would like to add one more thing that, as I mentioned in my presentation, the Foundation for Jewish Heritage in Italy is doing in this moment a very important work of cataloging all the Jewish heritage in Italy. And at the end of this very huge and important work, the Center for the Catalog, arranged by the Foundation, will be located in Ferrara, in the Maze. So Ferrara would be the center for the Italian Jewish heritage. That was discussed with the Union of Jewish Communities, that agreed on the fact that besides put it in Rome, in the center, it should be put in Ferrara. So I think we have really some opportunities to do there, thanks also to the wonderful relations that we get and we have with the local university in Ferrara, which is a good university, and especially in the architecture and art faculty. And so I would like to thank Jonathan, and we can work on this idea, and maybe in some next meeting we could be ready to present, to submit a proposal on that issue. Thank you very much to everybody.
Just 30 seconds to say that I was reminiscing with Hetty when we met here probably like a dozen years ago. There was in this very room a meeting of, I think it was Jewish Museum curators, and I just came here because I wanted to meet her. And I realized there was a total disconnect between that event and the Jewish community and the Jewish Museum. So I really want to say that this is a wonderful event, also because Brigitte and Ruth and Sally Berkowitz, who cannot be here with us, were really not only perfect organizers of the event, but also made every effort to ensure that there would be a real, as I said, exchange and collaboration between Jewish Venice in general and the organizers. The Jewish Museum and Cop Cultura were fully involved, were part of this event. Some Jewish community members were here in these 2 days, and Bet Venezia was very happy to be involved. So I really want to thank the organizer for bringing this quality event, and hope you come back. Thank you very much.
So thank you. Arrivederci, bon voyage.